Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back. And now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact. Hey everyone, welcome back. So today I have with me Tara McMullin. Tara received an autism diagnosis at the age of 38. And it profoundly impacted her life and her relationships. She is a divorced and remarried mother. And so she has navigated all of the waters of, motherhood and divorce and dating and remarriage before actually understanding and having her diagnosis. And so in this episode, we have really great and illuminating conversations about how that impacted her and how the diagnosis has changed the way that she understands herself and her relationships and how she's better able to communicate her needs and how that impacts her marriage in particular. So it's a great episode. I'm so grateful for Tara for coming on and talking about all this stuff with us. She normally talks about, she studies the future of work through the lens of philosophy, critical theory, and media. She is the creator of What Works and the co-founder of YellowHouse.Media, which is a boutique production agency. And full disclosure, her husband, Sean, I work with as part of my podcast revamping in this latest sort of phase of things. Sean has been pretty instrumental in creating these series and really, honing and focusing the podcast. So I am grateful for both Tara and Sean. And I love this episode. If you like it, please share it. And if you like it a lot and want to give it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, that would also be amazing. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Tara McMullin. Tara, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. I'm really excited about this conversation. And I'm also just really excited to connect with you because we've known each other for a really long time.
Yeah, a long time.
On the mean streets of the internet. Just give us a little background about your story. I mean, you were diagnosed as autistic at 38.
Yes.
And that, I imagine, changed your whole life in ways good and bad, or I
would say 100% good. And I can explain why, but I'll say that, I think for a lot of women diagnosed later in life, my story is very similar to theirs. And a lot of us are just glad to have a label, an identity that kind of gives us a way of talking about ourselves and our experience that we haven't had our whole lives. So there's a paper that I love to reference by a sociologist named Catherine Tan. And it's all about how later in life diagnoses are a form of biographical illumination. Right? And especially of neurodivergence and autism specifically. And the idea is that, I had autistic experiences my entire life, right? I had an entire life of feeling like I never quite fit in, or like I wasn't quite operating on the same wavelength as everyone else. And as long as you don't have a way of talking about that, like you can't narrate your own story, right? Like, how do you narrate how do you explain to people, no, my version of introversion is very different from your version of introversion, for example. My version of social anxiety is different from your version of social anxiety, all of these different things. And so I love that idea of biographical illumination because that is 100% my experience. So like I said, I've had autistic experiences my whole life. I can remember in the maybe late 90s, seeing like a 60 Minutes piece on Asperger's syndrome, right? And they're talking about it as these young men who are obsessed with math and they're loners and all of these different things. But, the first part of that segment, I was like, this feels really familiar. Is this me? And then, of course, it goes on to talk about the math and the boys and this looks a very particular way. And that way was not me, even though those experiences felt so familiar. So I had written that off for years and years. And it wasn't until I started seeing women my age who I very much related to on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever, talking about being autistic or mentioning that they were autistic. And it was at the same time where I was dealing with just a lot of social anxiety, a lot of just feeling completely out of all capacity for, emotional management and socialization and all of these different things. And so I started to sort of ask some questions and, as a child of the internet does, start Googling things and start taking assessments. And I think the first assessment I took was probably back in like 2015 or 2016, like a long time, or feels like a long time ago now. And of course, got a very high score back. And I was like, I don't know about that. That seems wrong. And then it wasn't until in 2021 where I really started to take it seriously. And that's when asking around, talking to different people, reading as much as I could, talking to my doctor, talking to my therapist, and kind of coming to this realization that, yes, this is 100% me. Reading memoirs of other autistic women, and just feeling like this person is narrating my story in a way I've never, or my interior life in a way that I have never felt. I've never felt that much recognition before. So that kind of gets us to the diagnosis piece.
Right. I've had that experience with other things, right? Where someone it was actually my first Al-Anon meeting, I think, was people were speaking out loud the interior things that I had never even put a name to, right? And it's that feeling of being so seen and understood, right? And there's a name for it and there's a place for it. And it is so validating. I mean, that was, one experience about sort of my experience is not even about like who I am, right? So like, I can only imagine that would have been unbelievably validating for you.
Yeah, 100%. The book that kind of sealed the deal for me it's called The Electricity of Every Living Thing. These things that I talk about are so like in my brain that if it short circuits like that, I'm like, where am I and what am I doing? It's called The Electricity of Every Living Thing, and it's by a wonderful author named Catherine May. She had a New York Times bestseller a couple years back with a book called Wintering that you might be familiar with, or that people in the audience might be familiar with. This book is specifically about her journey of coming to the realization that she was autistic, being assessed for autism in England, and then just how she was processing that. And it was amazing, to read this and just feel like, oh, it's not just me. And also in some ways, like the not fitting in and the difference and that was all affirmed, right? Because so much of trying to affirm your difference to people gets, you get back, oh, it's like, oh yeah, I feel that way too, or I get anxious in social situations, or, this happens or that happens. It's like, no, 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 no.
Mm-mm.
There is something dramatically different that I don't think you're getting, but that I'm feeling. And so to see that on a page and be like, no, really, I am different. And there are other people that are different like me is a pretty incredible realization.
Yes. Yes. And I love, I remember when my son was diagnosed with very, very severe ADHD, there was this relief that washed over me while it was like, oh, fuck, here's like a whole new set of issues, or here's a new path in your life, right? Just to be like, oh, it's not me. Yeah. It's not him. It's this thing, right? And there's a name for it, and there's a path, and there's like an entire like reworking of our entire system around the diagnosis. But it did feel like, oh, okay. Oh, thank God. Right. While it was also like, oh, fuck. Yeah. It was also like, oh, okay. Yeah. So you were diagnosed at 38. You're a mom. You're married. You've been running a very, very sort of prolific and successful business for a number of years. I'm imagining this changed kind of all of that.
Business-wise, it gave me permission to live and work my values in a different way. I have very strong values for collective care and community care and making other people feel seen and heard and connecting other people. And sometimes I'm good at it. And always it is exhausting. And so I had gotten to this point between 2017 and 2021, where I was running a community of hundreds of people. I had a full-time employee. I'm also managing the podcasting agency with my husband. And so I was just doing all of this emotional labor and affective labor all over the place. And I was completely strung out, just at the end of my capacity, the end of my bandwidth completely, kind of learning, yes, this is probably not the best thing for me. This is not a good way to use my energy. It allowed me to make the decision to shut that down and find ways of working that actually worked for me, as opposed to finding ways of working within a certain way of expressing my values, right? If I have a value for collective care, it doesn't mean that I need to lead a collective of people who care for each other and expect me to care for them, right? It can mean that I write about collective care and the economics of collective care and the strategies and how we run our businesses within this kind of an ethos, but it doesn't mean I have to do it myself.
You have to do it, right?
Other people are really good at it and really well equipped for it, and I don't have to be that person. So it's been an interesting sort of lens for negotiating how I do what I do without sacrificing the values that I really, really believe in. In terms of my marriage, I think it's been extremely positive because it gives us a vocabulary for some of the things that I do or don't do that had been contentious in our relationship and still are, from time to time. But we have a vocabulary to talk about it now, which we didn't before. As far as parenting goes, my kid she turned 16 in a week from when we're recording this, and she has just the most amazing personality in terms of how she supports her friends. And so I think even without knowing fully like what I need, her sense of what I need and how she can support me is really incredible. I support her in different ways, and I support her in ways that are probably very, very different from a lot of other mothers, or from the stereotypical idea of what a mother does. But it has been wonderful. That sort of realization and that give and take has been really great for our relationship.
I love that. I love that. All right, we need to take a quick break. And On the other side of the break, I want to talk a little bit more about your marriage.
Yeah.
In particular, I want to talk about masking and what that is and how that impacts you in the future. But we'll be right back.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. You guys, a new school year is starting soon, and if you're a parent, you want to make this new school year an opportunity for your kids to learn important life skills and continue building independence. So for that, I recommend Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families where kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely. And parents can keep an eye on kids' new money habits. Then there's Greenlight's Infinity Plan, which includes the same access to financial literacy education that makes Greenlight a valuable resource for millions of parents and kids, myself included, plus built-in safety to give you peace of mind. With a chores feature that lets you reward kids for honoring their responsibilities around the house, you can help kids get into their fall routine more easily than ever. So no matter which features make the most sense for your household, Greenlight is the easy, convenient way for parents to raise financially smart kids and for families to navigate life together, even if living apart. So sign up for Greenlight today and get your first month free when you go to greenlight.com/DSG. That's greenlight.com/DSG to try Greenlight for free. Greenlight.com/DSG.
Today's episode is sponsored by MIDI Health. You guys have heard me talk about MIDI over the last couple of months and how amazing I feel like it is to have healthcare that is designed specifically for women. We know that this is so sorely lacking in our healthcare these days. I want to talk to you about some of the results that they have seen. So 94% of women report an improvement in hot flashes and or night sweats within 3 months. You guys, if you have hot flashes, you know that like an improvement like that would completely change your life. 93% report an improvement in their sleep and insomnia. Moodiness, irritability, anxiety, or depression. 92% report improvement within 2 months. 87% report improvement within 5 months of painful sex, vaginal dryness, and libido changes. 89% report improvement within 5 months of brain fog, memory lapses. It goes on. We've got hair and skin changes, joint pain. It's simply unbelievable how much women-centered healthcare can improve our lives. I am a huge proponent of this. We've got to be seen by the experts, people who specialize in women's healthcare, and that is what MIDI is. They are experts in women's healthcare. So go to joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com and book your virtual visit today because you deserve to feel great. Okay, we are back. Before the break, we were talking about your marriage. You basically were in this marriage for a while before you got diagnosed, right? And so how did this, like you said, it gave a name for things that had been issues in the marriage. How can you sort of explain what some of those were and how they're connected to autism and what that looked like for you in your marriage? Everyone's marriage is different, but
yeah. So I think it's probably helpful to start by saying that I am married to a wonderful man who is in so many ways not the stereotypical, 40 plus year old white man. Yeah.
Can confirm. He's amazing.
Yeah. Yes. He's absolutely amazing. He is so caring, so emotionally available, like all of these things. And then I am not those things, right? Like, I am caring, but I'm not very emotionally available most of the time. Like,
right.
It's a hard thing for me to negotiate. And so that was sort of the core conflict is just, I can remember him saying to me at one point, like, don't you want to connect with me more? And I'm like, I don't know what you mean by that. He knew exactly what he meant by that.
Of course.
Maybe everyone listening knows what he meant by that. I have a better idea now. This was a couple of years ago, but I didn't get it then. And I couldn't get him to tell me exactly what he meant, because for him, this idea of connecting was a very specific thing.
Right.
But for me, connecting was like, I thought we already had a really deep connection. Like, I thought this was all good. And he's trying to like pull me out of my head, right? He's trying to get me to share more of what I'm thinking about, what I'm feeling, all of these things. But that doesn't come naturally to me. Like I live in my head and I'm very happy in my head. And unless he pulls, unless he asks me the right question or starts the right conversation, it can be really hard for me to get out of my head. So that's sort of like the baseline, not conflict, but confusion that I think just about every other thing that we've dealt with kind of springs from. I think another piece that is continually challenging for us, even now, is my nonverbal communication. So it's taken a lot of reminding to say for him to kind of process that just because I have a certain look on my face or my body language is a certain way, or even that I'm using a certain tone of voice, that doesn't mean what he thinks it means. I speak a different language, essentially, than he does. And that I need to learn his language, but he also needs to learn my language. And there's this concept in critical autism studies called the double empathy problem. And the idea is that because people with autism are typically sort of stereotyped as lacking empathy and being disordered,
right,
we're and sort of labeled as atypical, it's put on us to learn the common language of empathy. But autistic people don't actually lack empathy. We experience empathy very differently than neurotypical people. And we don't get non-autistic people to try to learn our language very often. And so one of the things that he really works on is trying to learn my language and learn how I express myself, how I express empathy, how I express emotional pain and joy and these kinds of things, because it looks really different from the way he does.
You wrote an article that I read. I can't remember what it was in, but you wrote about it. Oh, I think it was on your Substack, actually. About somebody was talking about learning language.
Activist's name is Jim Sinclair, and the essay's name is "Don't Mourn for Us."
Okay, there's that, right? But it's talking about like whose responsibility is it,
right,
to learn the language? And you said something, and maybe it was quoting Sinclair, about the amount of energy that you are already putting out to be in this world, and how the onus being put on you to then explain how much work it is for you to live in this world. It's like it's a double layer of work. And I just thought that was so profound. And it was on your Substack, you had talked about it in the context of language. And right, like somebody had written in like, who's responsible for learning the language? And you've got somebody who is out of their culture. Let's say somebody who comes from Asia and is living in the US, and they are already completely overwhelmed by a different culture, and you're asking them to learn a new language, and you're putting all the responsibility on them to change and shift with like no empathy or return for that. So that's what you were just saying, just reminded me of that. The fact that your husband, Sean, is actually taking that on to meet you where you need to be met, which I'm sure is a stretch for him. Absolutely. Just as right. And but the amount that you've already been stretching is so much. I just think that it's so rare in relationships that someone's willing and able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we see it with all of the conversation that has bloomed around inclusion and diversity and understanding code switching and these different things. Like, there are some groups of people for whom we have started to recognize the amount of work they put in to exist in the same room as us, right? Or even just for women, generally speaking, right? We have learned to live in a world created by and for men, right? And we have learned that language, and we get told then we're shrill, we're too emotional, we're all of these different things, even though we are doing everything we possibly can to fit into this other world, right? And so it doesn't, I don't mean to in any way equate these experiences or the harms that can be caused, but there's a lot of different groups for whom we see markers of cultural difference. Autistic people typically do not have any outward markers of our difference, of the way that we process the world differently. And so if we don't conform to the ways that others express emotions, to the ways others connect with friends or family or partners, we get labeled as rude, we get labeled as lacking empathy, we get labeled as being, argumentative or know-it-alls. For me, those are all things that I've been called. Those are all, criticisms that I've received. And people who know me know that I'm not those things. And at the same time, they also know that I can very much give that effect out into the world, right?
Right. And you can appear that way.
Yeah. And so what masking is, to kind of, I think that's where we were going.
Right.
Masking is really the process of learning to behave in the way others expect you to behave, even though it is not your natural mode of conduct. So that means like forcing yourself to look sad at a funeral when sad may not be a look on your face that comes naturally to you. It doesn't mean you're not sad. It doesn't mean also that you're not feeling sad the way other people feel sad, right? Feelings are a whole weird thing, but that means that they come out on your face, in your body language, in your tone of voice, in all sorts of different ways. It means, like, for me, getting very good at looking directly into my webcam and smiling and nodding my head a lot. Because if I don't, and if I don't keep my camera, like if I don't see myself, like Sean always hides his self view in Zoom, I can't do that. Because if I do that, then I'm afraid that I will be making weird faces the whole time we're on a call. And I already know I'm going to make weird faces on a call. I just need to minimize that as much as possible. So I need to be able to see what my face is doing. And I need to be able to project, yes, I am listening to you. And yes, you are making great points. And thank you so much for sharing, right? I don't mean that I'm doing that right now.
You can literally not do that.
You
can literally not do that if you want right now. I am not judging. I don't care. This is a great conversation. I don't care what your face is doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about masking, though, is, and this is from, just from kind of cursory research, this is especially true among autistic women, is that because autistic presentation in women is so outside of the bounds of typical female social expectations, it is something that we learn very early. It's why so many women do not get diagnosed as children or get diagnosed at the same rate as boys do. It is actually difficult for me to turn masking off if anyone else is in the room. And that includes Sean. Like, I don't know how to function that way. Like, I'm only like mask free when I'm by myself.
All right, we need to take another quick break. Yep. And then I want to come back and I want to talk about this connection thing with Sean. Because I find that really fascinating, but we'll be right back.
This message is sponsored by HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip the trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. You guys, I know that in the midst of all that you're going through and all that you're thinking about and all of the decision fatigue that you're already dealing with, the last thing you want to be doing is meal planning, making lists, buying tons of ingredients that then you have to throw away at the end of the week. And you start to feel frustrated and like it's a waste. And like, why can't you keep on top of this stuff? Stop. Stop even trying. HelloFresh has got your back. From the planning, the shopping, and prepping to actually getting everyone to enjoy what you've made, family dinners can be stressful. HelloFresh gets it, and they make it easy by delivering fresh ingredients and picky eater approved recipes right to your door each week. With a changing menu of 50 recipes to choose from each week, HelloFresh makes it easy to always find something that the whole family will love. And if you have a rotating number of people in your house each week, you can also have their 6-portion plan that are perfect for feeding the whole family or to have leftovers for effortless lunches the next day. HelloFresh saves time, it saves energy, and it really does save you money. I really, really highly recommend using HelloFresh, and for a limited time, kids eat free. So go to HelloFresh.com/DSGkids to unlock this exclusive offer. 1 free kids meal box for 2 months while your subscription is active. So that's free kids meals just by going to HelloFresh.com/DSGkids. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit, so don't miss out.
Because if you know what their deal breakers are in advance, you can strategize around that. So if you know that the total deal breaker for your spouse is that they're going to want to keep the house, that means a lot to them, you can maybe, if you know that you are willing to give up the house, maybe don't say that right away. Maybe as part of your strategy is that you put that in your back pocket and you hold on to it until you come to one of your deal breakers and you say, you know what? If you'll grant me this thing that you really want, that's a deal breaker for you, I will give you, and then you present your deal breaker. So again, strategy, negotiation, deal breaker for deal breaker. You always want to know what their bottom lines are as much as possible. And again, you may or may not want to reveal yours, but you know your spouse really well. If you are divorcing a high conflict personality, they are probably most interested in maybe how they're perceived by others, right? Narcissists, really, that is their key thing. How am I going to be perceived? So I definitely want, custody, but also sometimes they don't want custody. They just want to be seen with their kids a lot in public. Really, that's what it is. Is it custody you want, or is it that you want to be seen as father of the year? Is it that you want to stay in the house so that you can look like they want to stay in the house so that they can look like the abandoned, sad spouse whose, wife left him? Fine. Give him that. Let him have it. Right? So again, you probably know what their deal breakers are. You probably, because you know them well enough, because you have been able to do like a personality profile on them because you've been married to them for 20 years or however long it's been, you can probably assess this. This is something I do with my clients too. It's like, let's get into their personality and we'll profile them and figure out so that we know what is most important to them so that we can strategize around that. So those are your deal breakers, my love. What are your deal breakers?
Feel like you're the martyr in your family? You're not alone. Hey, this is Joanne.
And Bree.
And we're from the No Guilt Mom podcast. Bree, we talk to a lot of moms.
Yeah, we sure do.
And if you're a mom who has a to-do list that is so massive that you get overwhelmed and you shut down,
or if you fall into the habit of doing everything for everyone and don't know how to change it, we can help you become a no-guilt mom.
we're going to take you from family martyr to family model. That's role model, so that you role model the behavior that you want to see out of your kids.
You're going to go from being tired and overwhelmed to energized and guilt-free.
Every week, you'll get actionable strategies that you can implement right away from the experts that we interview and from us.
We also have a whole lot of fun, so check out the No Guilt Mom podcast everywhere you listen to your favorite shows.
I want to talk about this thing about Sean wanting to connect, which I can see is so Sean, right? That's
Sean.
his whole ethos, right? There's something about like both of you getting your needs met from each other, but I think it's like finding different ways to get them met, which I think does require a certain level of commitment from both parties, obviously. So how have you guys navigated that? Like, how have you helped Sean feel more connected without having that feel stressful to you or exhausting?
Oh, this is a hard question. So I would say that part of that initial conversation and kind of where it's gone in the years since is that he is realizing that I can't do what maybe he would prefer. Like in an ideal world, the way I would communicate with him is just not something that is going to happen for me, or if I made myself do that, he would be exerting an unfair level of stress on me, or an unfair
which he
burden
wouldn't
on
want to
me.
do, right?
No, exactly.
So it's like it's this it feels like a conflict, in like an internal conflict too, right?
Totally.
Mhm.
So I think a few things have kind of eased this issue. One of them is, as I had said way earlier, shutting down the sort of business community that I was running, and really just starting to work by myself. So that it had been, I'd work, I wasn't even working that many hours, but let's say I worked 9 to 5. At the end of the day, it was literally painful for me to talk. Like, I had nothing left to say. I had no emotional support left to give, because I had expended all of it working.
Same girl.
And so, and so I would literally just, I would shut down every single night. Nothing. Stepping away from that has given me more energy for him in the evenings. And that's meant that, like, financially, we have to figure some different things out, or we've had to figure some different things out, and we're kind of still in that process. But that's been an important part of it, is just me getting to do work, whatever that looks like, by myself, without having to emotionally support others, except, a few times a week, I maybe have a strategy session with a client, or we've got this or we've got that. So that's one thing, is making that change earlier in the day so that I have more bandwidth for him in the evenings. Another piece is recognizing when it's easier for me to talk to him the way he wants me to talk to him. So, for instance, one of the simple things that we've figured out is that he loves to, like, talk on the couch, like we're both facing each other and we're like, it's close. I can't talk about things that are, like, important, or things that are emotionally involved facing someone.
Right. Yes.
Right.
100%. Yep.
So,
absolutely. Yes.
So we've figured out that if we go for a drive and we're both facing forward, I'm much better.
Right.
It's funny, before, when we first met, we spent a lot of time at bars, and literally would be sitting facing the bar. Right. Instead of facing each other. We never sat in booths. We never sat at tables. We always sat at the bar. And so we'd have great conversations. And then he stopped drinking. Stopped going to bars. And that was a whole other thing, right? So we had to figure out, like, oh, wait, the car is like going to the bar. So the car is a good place for us to talk.
You can go to the diner. You can go sit at the counter at the diner.
True.
Totally. Yes.
So that's another piece. Like I said, just him recognizing that just because I don't share my entire interior life with him, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It doesn't mean that we're not connected. It just means that my interior life is extremely interior.
Right.
And I'll also add here too, that one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and kind of wanting to do some research around, is, like, my level of social needs. So you were talking about, like, how we both get our needs met. Well, my needs are met by me being alone.
Right. Yes.
Right. So I have very, very low social needs. Like, I am perfectly happy. Like, for instance, for my 40th birthday, I went to a cabin in New York on a lake by myself for 4 days, and I would have happily stayed there a month, 2 months, 6 months by myself.
Wow.
It has absolutely nothing to do with me not loving my husband, and has absolutely everything to do with feeling like my needs are being met by this quiet
solitude
and solitude.
Yeah, I relate to that. Maybe not a month or two, but like even for a day, just being like, no, I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to see anybody. I'm good. I'm so happy. I had that day yesterday. My mom was like, do you want to have dinner? I was like, oh no, I really don't. And then does Sean, so with that, right? So Sean is getting his needs met by like this, it's okay for him. Like he's going to have to be okay with it not being face to face, right?
Yeah.
So there's a compromise. I told you before we started recording is that I will often hear from women who are not getting their needs met in their marriages or whose husbands are, maybe more solitary or whatever. I think he might be autistic, or when he's abusive. I think he's, someone will say, sounds like he's autistic. Let's talk about the difference between being autistic and being an asshole.
Yes. So I really love to read memoir. And a couple of years ago, I started reading a book called Lady Parts by an author named Deborah Kopeikin, I think.
Okay.
And I'm reading the first couple chapters. I'm loving it. It's exactly what I expected. It's exactly the kind of thing I like to read. And then she starts talking about her ex-husband and the reason that he's her ex-husband and how he just completely lacks empathy. And he does this and he does that. And then she says, well, it turns out that he can't feel empathy and he can't do this and he can't do that because he's autistic. And I had to stop reading it because it was so offensive to me. And I think that, I know plenty of other people have loved that book. Plenty of other people loved her previous book. I'm sure she's lovely. But as I'm reading, all I could hear was her lack of interest in understanding him and what he was thinking and what was like going on inside of his experience.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like, yeah, this guy sounds like an asshole. like, you don't have to be married to an asshole. You don't have to be married to someone who doesn't meet your needs or who creates an environment or needs an environment in which you cannot thrive, right? Like no one is saying that these things have to be just because someone is autistic that you need to like suck it up and deal with it, right?
Right.
And I think it's really important that there is an understanding that autism and being an asshole are two different things. And maybe that sounds really obvious, but to your point, it clearly isn't, right?
No, I hear it all the time. I hear it all the time. But so I think what I'm hearing too is that, first of all, I love that like what you're saying is she was kind of lacking empathy for his experience of being autistic. And also in any relationship dynamic, there are two people that have to work really hard at understanding not just themselves, but their partner and their needs. I know plenty of people who will say, well, I'm autistic, so I can't. So that's that. So you have to, accept me for who I am. And and that's not a way to be in a relationship.
I mean, I think to go back to what we were saying earlier with like learning the other person's language and things like that, I think that there is a lot of room to say I'm autistic and I can't, or I'm autistic and this is my limit. Like I'm very pro acknowledging limits. And that is something that an autism diagnosis has really allowed me to do. Say, you might think that I'm capable of this thing, but I need you to believe me that I am not capable of doing this thing right now, or that I have reached a hard limit, right? I think there has to be a lot of room for that. And that doesn't mean that a person who has those limits is going to be the right person for somebody else. Right. I am very lucky to have met Sean when I did and how I did, and to have built a relationship with him in the way that we've built this relationship. And I'm lucky that he is mostly proactive about getting his social needs met in other ways that don't require me to do it. And that's something he's practicing and working on regularly. But, I don't begrudge my first husband, my kid's dad, for not getting me at all, and not like that did not work out. And, we're fine now. We're friendly now. And it hasn't been a problem for years, but that was not a relationship that was going to work for me. But I think importantly, it was not a relationship that was going to work for him either. And I could continue kind of pretending, masking, molding myself into the behavior that I thought he wanted from me, but it was never going to work in the end. So, like I said, I do think there has to be room for the I'm autistic and I can't. But I think there's the response to that on the neurotypical side has to be, is that I can't something I can live with or something I can't live with?
Right.
Is that a compromise I'm willing to make, or is it not a compromise I'm willing to make?
Well, I think I love it just keeps coming back to me. I can't sit on the couch and face you and have emotional conversations. I can get in the car and face front. Right. So like we can find ways. But if it was, let's say, I can't at all, period, end of story, in any capacity, then that would be a really difficult thing that Sean would have to decide upon. Yeah. Right?
100%.
I mean, and that would be so valid. The depth of exploration that you are willing to do and he's willing to do in order to bring that to the table and figure that out, I think is, for me, the key in any relationship.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter, right? Do you think having a diagnosis earlier would have impacted your first marriage? Or, I mean, how do you feel like?
I think had I had a diagnosis earlier, I would have never been in that marriage. The reason that marriage happened had to do with a really intense period of burnout and depression after college that had ended up changing my trajectory. And had I had more support and more understanding, I would have followed through on what my initial trajectory was, but I'd be living a very different life now. So there's the good and the bad.
Right.
One day I will get back to that trajectory. That's the plan anyway.
I'm curious. Okay. Okay.
I wanted to say, like, to the compromise piece, or like to the give and take piece, I often think about autism, or my experience of autism, as a number of different layers. So it's especially true around sound. Sound processing, oral processing is very difficult for me. Okay. And so, like, if it's raining and the radio's on and the windshield wipers are on in the car and Sean's trying to talk to me, like, that's too many layers of sound, right? Like, the radio needs to get shut off. And then as long as it's not a downpour, we can talk. But I can't have all of that going on at once. Or like we live on a very busy street, and it can be super overwhelming in a way that I'm not even cognizant of, just to be in the living room with the traffic. This will change when we move. This is our number one priority, is to find someplace quiet. But anyhow, it's also very true of, like, just experience in general. So having an emotional conversation, or a conversation about emotions, about, my experience, me sharing my inner life, like, that is such a thick layer that takes up so much space that I don't have room. I don't have the capacity for many other layers. And one of the other layers that's really challenging for me is eye contact. I mean, it's a pretty typical, autistic symptom or autistic presentation, right? Is difficulty making eye contact. I'm very well trained in doing it when I have to. And I'm I'm very capable of it. I would say one of the things that I have unmasked on in the last few years is not forcing myself to maintain eye contact on interviews, in coaching sessions, things like that. So I'm a little bit better about that now. But to the point of, like, sitting on the couch together, if we're facing each other, I instinctively, or not instinctively, but like I have conditioned myself to force eye contact. That is not helpful. That is the opposite of helpful. I can't have that conversation if I am both stretched on the capacity for talking about my inner life and stretched in the capacity for eye contact. Those two things can't happen at the same time. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
So I'm always thinking about like, and Sean is very good about thinking about this too, is like, what is the layer that's unnecessary here? What is the aspect that's taking up bandwidth, that's taking up capacity that really doesn't matter? And it's always going to be eye contact for me, right? Or it's always going to be a layer of sound. These things do not matter. But if he wants to have a deep conversation with me, or if he just wants me to talk for more than a sentence or two at a time, like, then these are the things that we can take out of the equation so that I can do those things and enjoy those things.
The idea that you don't feel empathy or want to connect with your husband, that you're not capable of love, like it's just a whole different, it's not a different experience. Is it a different experience or is it a different presentation?
It's both. It is a different experience and it's a different presentation. I would say that like the old adage, right, is that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Right. So I don't want to speak for other people, but for me, my experience of emotion, just, based on what Sean tells me, based on what I pick up from the rest of the world, based on reading a lot of memoir, I think to understand how other people experience the world, right? There's a reason that I enjoy reading women's memoir. I know that my experience is different and I know that my presentation is different. So yeah, it's different. It's like being, as Jim Sinclair said, it's like being a foreigner in a foreign land all the time.
Sounds exhausting.
It is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like no wonder. So are there any words of wisdom from your experience, the way that you have navigated this both personally and intimately with Sean, to women who might be, have autism, or women who are married to someone who's autistic? What would you say is sort of key to navigating a relationship in this way?
With deference to what I just said about one autistic person.
Yes.
I think the layers thing is helpful. I wrote about that in regards to sound a couple of months back, or it was a while ago now, actually. And even among non-autistic people, that got a really big like, oh, that's helpful, right? To think about layers. And so whether it's layers of needs, layers of experience, layers of stress, how do you think about what all is happening in any given situation and how you can extract the stuff that doesn't matter so that both people are focused on what does matter, what they do need, what their limits are, and able to show up more fully within that. I think another thing that's been really, I wrote about this in my book, that's been really helpful for me is thinking about capacity and really understanding what different kinds of activities take up different forms of my capacity. So capacity is our access to resources. So money, time, emotional bandwidth, mental bandwidth, social support, like anything that you draw on to be able to do what you do on a daily basis, and to, be who you are and get through your day, those are resources. And so for me, like understanding that emotionally managing other people is not like I need to do it as little as possible, because if I do it too much during the day, I don't have the capacity in the evening for what actually matters a lot more to me than emotionally managing other people, right?
Right.
Or being emotionally available for other people. So thinking about that capacity and really understanding like, okay, that means I can only have 2 Zoom calls a week. Like that's all I can manage. That's going to be the limit. Or if it's going to go over that, if like there's a week I need to have 4 or 5, well, that means that I need more time in the evening to just be quiet and be alone and not have other demands put on me. And so being able to have these different frameworks, whether it's layers, whether it's capacity, gives me and gives us, Sean and I think a structure and, like I said, a vocabulary for talking about our needs in a way that feels more familiar to me, right? Because his way of talking about his needs, his way of identifying his needs is very different from mine. But the more I can say, like, this is how I'm thinking about it, I want you to think about my needs in this way as well, because that's how I'm experiencing them. So, if I tell you emotionally my capacity is shot, you need to know what that means for you and for me and our expectations of each other. And then we can move on from there, and I can reclaim my energy or store up in some other way. So I think having those different frameworks and building a mutual vocabulary has been the most helpful thing for us, and also personally the most helpful thing for me as well.
It just sounds like so much intentionality.
Yeah.
So, right. Which can be so exhausting. You'd be like, you sort of, I think we all, to a degree, walk through the world being like, well, this is who I am and these are my needs and this is how I function. And sort of to recognize that other people don't function the same way we do. And certainly in an neurodivergent of any kind, but an autistic relationship with a neurotypical, like, none of us function the same. And so the level of intentionality to dig into it and then express it and schedule around it, like, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It is. It is a lot. The thing, kind of coming back to empathy for a second.
Yeah.
What I like to think about empathy is that sort of pop culturally, pop psychology wise, we've learned to think about empathy as feeling what someone else feels or sharing experience with someone else. And to me, empathy has to start from a place of imagining that someone else's experience is as different as they tell you it is.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
That's something that we don't do very often. We don't allow someone else's experience to be different from our own. We don't expect other people to respond to situations differently than we would. I'm sure there are people listening who think, oh yeah, I do. No, I don't think that you do. Like, I don't mean to be super duper contrary, but like, living in the world this way for 42 years now, I could tell you it is few and far between the number of people who have that kind of imagination. It is beneficial for people who are very different from us, but it's also beneficial just for all of us. Because as you said, we're all experiencing the world differently. We all have different backgrounds that we're drawing on, cultures that we're drawing on, family, systems that we're drawing on. So yeah. Anyhow, sorry. Rambling.
No, I think
autistic rambling.
No, I think it's really important, because empathy is not that you feel the same thing that another person feels. It really is that you understand that someone else you don't have to agree with their point of view. You don't have to understand their point of view. You just have to understand that they have a very valid point of view that is different from yours.
Yep.
And it matters as much as yours. All right. Tara, thank you so much. I feel like we could talk about this for a lot longer, but I'm not going to put that much stress on you on Zoom. So
I'm always very cognizant of when I'm doing an interview like this and I'm like saying, oh, these calls are just so exhausting and stressful. I'm like, oh, this person has got to think that I am just nuts for doing this and that they're torturing me.
I just know, listen, I'm just aware of your generosity, because knowing what it takes from you, I appreciate that you chose to do this and offer your experience and expertise with this. I really am grateful.
Me too. Thank you.
And for people who want to follow along and learn from you and maybe gain a little bit more insights in these experiences, this isn't all you talk about.
No.
Where can people find you, and what will they expect from you there?
So the best place to find me is whatworks.fyi. That is my newsletter and / podcast. If you really just want to find the podcast, it's whatworkspodcast.com, but you can get there from either direction. So I write about rethinking work, business, and leadership for the 21st century economy. I talk about autism sometimes, but I would say that the newsletter is definitely written from an autistic perspective. And so if you're interested in, experiencing how someone else thinks about the world and processes, what's going on out there and the different messages that we get and the different kind of social milieu that we operate in, that's exactly what it is.
Amazing. So that's whatworks.fyi.
Correct.
All right. I love it. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.